here we are. It's Thursday, it's 1 o'clock, and we are here at the Birmingham Museum for our Facebook Live program. Today is October the 8th, and we are celebrating parks for the next few Facebook Live programs. And today we'll be talking about Barnum Park. And part of the reason we're talking about parks is to also piggyback on the current project going on in the city to develop a parks bond with the public to help fund parks going forward. And so there are going to be a lot of public meetings about this and a lot of information available, but we just want to plug that it's going on. But our role today is to talk about some historical information. And so I'm here today with Donna Cassiselli, and we're going to discuss not just Barnum Park, but its origins and what preceded the park itself in the form of Barnum School. So, Donna, take it away.
All right, so to understand the history of Barnum Park, you have to understand the history of Barnum School, because the park itself is pretty young. It's one of the newest parks here in Birmingham. But the history of Barnum Park, or Barnum School, or even just Barnum Farm, goes way, way back to Horace Barnum. He was born in 1814 in New York, but by 1837 owned land here in Birmingham. The first land records that I could find of him are from 1837. And he would marry in Birmingham in 1838, raise his family here, and he was actually a village trustee in 1873, 1874, but he would pass away in 1876. Now, there's a little confusion as to how his land came into the possession of the Birmingham School District to build the school on it. Some say that he would sell the initial first 5 acres to the school district. By this time there was like the one-room schools, and there was kind of already a school district. There was school boards planning on ways of constructing and building up and getting kids into school. So it's possible he could have sold it to him, but there's also a couple other mentions that he donated the money. He was a prominent blacksmith here in Birmingham during the time that he lived, and blacksmiths were an absolute necessity at this time. So being a trustee, being a blacksmith, and owning a farm, he would have been a pretty prominent citizen here in Birmingham. But whatever way the money or the land got to the school board, Barnum School was built in 1912. Now, it also, to be built, had a lot of complications. So, according to an Edward Smith, he was a longtime resident here in Birmingham. His father was on the school board for 9 years, and he actually remembers Barnum School being built. So he would be interviewed in the 1970s, and he was quite older at the time, but the story he gives is quite hilarious. So in the turn of the century, there was a faction of Birminghamers that did not want Birmingham to grow any bigger. They wanted it to stay rural, they wanted it to stay farm, they did not want to see it get any bigger. So they kind of put the kibosh on any growth, including schools. They voted every school bond down. We don't want any new schools, we don't want it growing. But then there was the other faction that definitely wanted the schools to grow. Well, the no school faction just always seemed to come out in numbers for the school board votes and vote everything down. But eventually, Mr. Mitchell, who owned the eccentric newspaper, conspired with the We Want Schools faction. And even though he needed to put a notice in the newspaper when a vote was going to be done, he decided to put in the smallest possible notice. And he put it in between the patent medicine ads, because nobody ever read the patent medicine ads. And so the retirees and the no school factions, who did not want Birmingham to grow, missed the notice, missed the vote, and then the school was finally able to build Barnum schools. So I thought that was kind of funny because it really shows also Mr. Mitchell's humor, you know, slipping it right between the patent medicines.
Although, I gotta wonder, wouldn't patent medicines, wouldn't the market for them really be those older folks?
You would think, but have you ever seen the newspaper page with all the patent medicines?
I haven't.
It's great. When we did the
Bunch of
video,
boxes with words. And
yes, when we did the video on the medicines last year, what were they thinking? Those ads are crazy. I mean, it's just easy. Just can't even deal with it.
All right.
So anyway, the school was originally built to have like between 4 and 8 classrooms. It was fondly referred to as the Ivory Towers because when it was first built, it had these long windows, elongated windows, so it kind of made it look taller than it really was. So they called it the Ivory Towers. Now, it went through many expansions and remodelings throughout the year and was finally expanded in 1942 into a junior high. So the school was then closed in 1976 and became the Birmingham Center for Continuing Ed, and that went on until 1981.
And hold it there.
I will hold it there.
Because I'm going to take over the floor for a minute to talk about a period in the school that you just referenced before you get to what else you want to say about the school and about Barnum Park. And that refers to 1929. There were, I think you were telling me too, that there were a number of references that the school was enlarged and it was improved and so forth. So the Barnum School grew, the neighborhoods around it began to grow, and as children moved into those neighborhoods, that's part of the basis for the school growing. In 1929, there was another set of renovations done, and they went all the way to the top-notch design for a new fireplace for the kindergarten. Fireplaces in schools in the 20s, especially for the youngest children, were a little bit more common than you might imagine, and it kind of derived from the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement in architecture, which was focused on the hearth side and focused on home and focused on gathering together and stories and storytelling. And so the Flint Faience and Tile Company emerged in around that same time, and they specialized in the special kind of tile finish and glazing that is borrows from a faience technique, which is an ancient technique. But the result is something like what you see behind me. This is, in fact, the Barnum School Flint Faience fireplace. Later on, and Donna will talk about this, the school was demolished and the fireplace was saved. It was stored, and then the museum was able to raise funds with a big donation from the Rotary and some private donations in 2011 and 2012 to install it on our wall so you can see what it looks like. So the reason that Flint Faience was so popular for elementary school fireplaces is that they did this line of storybook characters. What you see are different characters that they had in a catalog from storybook characters. For example, that's Little Bo Peep. There, she's lost her sheep, and here she's found them. Oh, feels much better now. In the middle is a fabulous set of 10 tiles of the Crooked Man, and that was based on a nursery rhyme of there was a crooked man who walked a crooked mile, etc., etc. And so you can see the Crooked Man tile in a series there. And other tiles that were in their catalog included these animals. So Adams School? I know Corton School. There was a school in Royal Oak. They all were built at about the same time. They all had some version of a storybook fireplace. But as far as I know, this one is the only one in a public institution where you can go in and see it. Well, we're not open right now, but you know what I mean. You can, it's being preserved for the public. So that was my little piece that I wanted to say about our fireplace, how it came about here, and how it's a piece of Barnum School right here in the museum. But now, going back to Donna for the rest of the story.
So anyway, when the school did close in 1976, it became the Center for Continuing Ed. But in 1981, it was sold to Beaumont Hospital, who used it as an outpatient cardiac rehab and community fitness center. Now, the city of Birmingham would repurchase back the school in 2002, but they would continue to lease the school to Beaumont as the cardiac outpatient. Now, the lease was to expire in 2008. And so by 2006, the city's like, well, what are we going to do with this land? What are we going to do with this building? The building wasn't looking so well. And so they decided to start into the planning stages for the school's future. What were they going to do with it? There were many suggestions as what to do with the structure and with the land. But it was not an easy decision. There were many different ideas. One of them was to turn it into a community center, to rehab the building, keep the swimming pool, turn it into a community center, kind of places where people could, almost like maybe an extension of the community house. But that would require a lot of money.
Right.
The second one was, what if they just sold it off? Just sold everything, private development for homes, and they were thinking of zoning it for homes, condos, and a senior facility. Well, the area people around Barnum School actually started raising funds to turn it into a park, saying, well, if you raise so-and-so amount of funds, we can back you up with even more funds. And they raised over $100,000 for really creating this park that they wanted. Well, of course, the park won out. We know that because it's Barnum Park now. Now, it is one of Birmingham's newest parks, and it was completed in 2009. But it has seen quite a few renovations, and one of the biggest ones is the idea of removing those foreign ornamentals and putting in new Michigan native plants that survive better. They look beautiful. I mean, Michigan plants, we've got some beautiful flora. So the idea was to kind of create this oasis or a sanctuary, a garden sanctuary. And one of the people we have to thank is Cindy Rose. And you may, if you're at Barnum Park, run into Cindy Rose. She has been fostering the park since its very conception. She has been involved in all of its aspects of its planning and implementation. And even today you can see her out there weeding, deadheading flowers. She's been taping the vines so that they grow. And she's just a very big part of Barnum Park. And of course, if you go to Barnum Park, you're going to want to see the arch. The archway is the actual original entranceway to the Barnum School, built back in 1912, so that's a fun little park. But of course, Barnum Park is a great park. It's got the soccer fields and the softball fields during summer. It has the ice rink in winter. It's 8 acres of pathways and of course the garden sanctuary. And if you go into the little reading nook, you might run into Barney. And I love Barney. He is the barn owl that sits atop the children's little free library. And he's known as Barney because in 2016, the Park and Rec Department decided to have a little competition on naming the owl. And Barney won. It was suggested by an Anne Honehart. And it's a play on the words Barnum and barn owl. So she was a clever young woman to be able to suggest such a cool name. So Barney won out. Yeah, it's just a really great park to visit today. It's one of several parks that we're going to be featuring this whole month.
I think that's a great story about how people who really cared about that site, who lived in the community and had a lot of neighborhood engagement, were able to not only marshal their immediate neighbors, but also really the whole city to bring those dollars at a time when, we had a horrible economic downturn. It was a unique opportunity to create a new park for people to pool their funds together, and created a park that is very unique because it's completely surrounded by a neighborhood, because it was a former neighborhood school. And it's a great site. If you have never been to Barnum Park, you should check it out. So we are going to be talking about parks again next week on Thursday. We're going to be talking about Martha Baldwin Park, which is right across the street from us here, and it has some very interesting stories connected to it, and how the site didn't start out as a park, I can tell you that, and what it is now by comparison. It's just a wonderful, also they use a lot of native plants there, but we'll get into that more next week. We'll have some photos of the fireplace, the cover of the book. Oh, I guess I could show that before we go. There's a book which is called Flint Faience Tiles A to Z. We'll put this photo up. It's by the Schiffer Collections group. It's not by a specific author, but cool, in a cool way, on page 196. Do you recognize anything there? It's the fireplace that we now have in our collection, but they have it when it was still inside the building, so you can see the bookshelves that were around it. This was when it was in the kindergarten wing before it was demolished. So we have that. And the last thing, parks are all about kids.
Yes.
And schools are all about kids. So isn't it suitable that this wonderful park came from the school setting, and you can see one of the doors here, the Barnum School. This is a 1917 photo, one of my favorite photos of second graders. I try to use this photo in every possible way I can, because the kids have the greatest expressions on their faces. We'll put this up too in our social media page when Caitlin gets a chance. So we hope we see you next week, and if you have any questions about this park, any park, really anything about Birmingham history, shoot it over to us and we'll do our best to answer it. Bye.